Hello and welcome, Star People. This is episode 162 and this is 8 PM, your intrepid Star Guide. And this is the beginning of a new arc. New series arc here, the Harmony Illusion. And this is where we integrate the idea that some aspects are inherently good and others bad. And starting with the most misunderstood aspect of them all, the trine. So we're going to introduce today the idea that trines are relational fluency rather than a cosmic lottery win. And so exploring the planets in trine, how they speak, the same elemental languages they might speak, and also how the ease can become a trap, a comfort zone, a prison, a place where growth goes to sleep or to die. So, a little bit of housekeeping before we get this. This is an arc of a larger series on aspects as a syntax, and so we're teaching astrology as a living, breathing language with tone, context and rhythm, not a fixed dictionary of meanings. So over the course of the next 3 episodes, we're going to dismantle the myth of harmonious aspects and build a more honest understanding. Okay? So, before that, we have social media. You can find us on Instagram and you can find us on Pinterest as well. There is a YouTube account and we have a groovy newsletter that is paid and free with over 500 archived posts, 80 episodes and counting. So I'm always putting content there, so that's where you want to be if you want to stay up to date on what's going on in the skies now. And all these links will be located in the show notes. And if you please be so kind as to share, to review, in addition to subscribing, so other people can also find this information and thereby benefit as well. And thank you very, very much. And now onward. Alrighty, so let's get to it, Star People. So this episode is called Are Trines Really Gifts? Okay, so let's talk about the language of gifts. So, here's the question. Who decided that ease equals fortune? Why do we call a natural aptitude a blessing when it goes underdeveloped precisely because it requires zero effort or no effort, which is basically the same thing? So, there is a cultural bias meaning a leaning toward, a confirmation bias toward the idea that in Western thinking. So Western capitalism loves the idea of innate talent. The idea justifies inequality, explains away privilege, and lets those with trines believe that they earned what flowed naturally. But is this the case? And so here's the flip of that. Trines can create complacency, blind spots, entitlement, and when something comes easily, we rarely question it, refine it, or notice when it stops serving us. So, let's try a reframe. Trines are not a gift. They are a fluency. Planets in trine, also points, asteroids, etc., they speak the same elemental dialect, understand each other's grammar, and communicate without the need for translation. This is intimacy, not fortune. And so the question for you Star People out there is, what if your trines aren't rewards from the cosmos? What if they are simply places where you've never had to struggle? And if that's not entirely, what if that's not a good thing? Or at least not entirely a good thing? And let's consider this also. The trine as dialogue, how the elements might speak to us. So, let's go through the trines as elements, because it is not unusual to find something called, what is called a grand trine. Now, grand trine is when 3 planets or more, but usually 3, form a triangle. And it can be in fire, it can be in earth, it can be in air, and it can be in water, okay? And so we are tending toward comfort and ease and convenience, because our nervous systems like certainty, they like comfort, they like ease, they like the known. And all of this is the antithesis to growth, to learning, to improving. And I'm not suggesting that improvement is necessary in the default all the time. I'm just saying that circumstances change, we change, and so things must change with it. And that means us, we must also change. So, fire trine, that'd be Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. Keywords are associated with the shared vision, mutual inspiration, yet also groupthink. When everybody in the room speaks the language of passion and certainty, who is there to question the direction? So an example would be Sun trine Mars. Confidence flows, action feels natural, yet there may be no break, no pause, no consideration of consequence or timing. It's just, I want to move, so I do. I'm excited, so I should take action. That's the vibe. Now, the shadow side to this is that now there's an assumption that your vision is universal. You can mistake enthusiasm for wisdom, and burnout is very real with a placement like this because you never learnt to conserve energy. So whether this is a grand trine, a fire trine, a grand fire trine, or just plain old single trine, it's a lot of energy. And most people are like, ooh, look at me, I've got all this fiery energy, I can do stuff. That's great, you can, absolutely. However, burnout is common because you've used up all the energy. And here's the thing, let me backtrack a bit. The thing about energy that most people don't know about nervous systems is that nervous systems need rest periods. There needs to be an ebb and a flow for it to pause and to integrate. And so if the energy is constantly, like it is in capitalism, go, 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 you're going to burn out because nobody tells you that you can't go 24/7. You cannot do everything 5 days a week. You cannot do everything every day, all the time, consistently the same, no problem, without it affecting you. Nervous systems don't operate like that. People don't operate like that. Life does not operate like that. And so the idea is that you keep pushing. You can just push, 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 and push past pain, push past tiredness and exhaustion to get the job done and bring the project in by published in due date, okay, by the deadline. And then why that doesn't work is because, as I've said, the nervous system don't work like that. In order to push through something, you're using tomorrow's energy stores today, which means tomorrow, when you need that, you will not have it. That's how it works. The body isn't an infinite producer of energy, an infinite producer of focus, of heart, of enthusiasm. At some point, those things need to go back to homeostasis so the nervous system can calm itself, regulate itself, and the body doesn't get flared up. So the idea that you can push past when you're tired, exhausted, lacking fuel, means that, oh yeah, I can push past it. No, if you push past it, you will have to use tomorrow's storehouses and the storehouses of the day after in order to make this happen. So you didn't magically find energy. You borrowed it from the future, and now when you need it in the future, it will not be there, is how this operates. And so that's very fire energy. Fire energy doesn't learn to conserve energy. It's just a really powerful energy constantly churning. Now, next up we have Earth trines, and that'd be Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, and that is an embodied trust. That means trust you can feel in your body somewhere. You can locate it, practical competence, yet there's a stubborn attachment to what works. When the body knows, the mind stops asking. So when we feel certainty, and each person is going to feel certainty and safety very differently in their nervous systems and in their bodies. But when that happens, your mind's like, oh, we solved the riddle. Okay, we can just lie here on this nice warm rock in the sun and just let the breeze blow and be happy and comfortable. Okay, so that is Earth trines. An example, Moon trine Saturn. Emotional regulation comes naturally, but you may not ever learn to be vulnerable, or more to the point, spontaneous, which is what the fire trine has in abundance. Spontaneity, which some people might label as impulsive. Okay, so that's the Moon trine Saturn. Now the shadow here is an over-reliance on routine, mistaking stability for safety, refusing growth because the current structure is very comfortable and it's working. Why would you change what works, right? The third trine is an air trine. That'd be Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius points there. Any points or planets there would be in an air trine. And air trines are intellectual rapport, effortless communication, yet also echo chambers when ideas flow easily and critical thinking can atrophy. Okay, so an example of that would be Mercury trine Uranus. Brilliance, originality, yet no filter, no editing, no discernment between insight and noise. So you can't tell signal from noise. Every distraction is being interpreted as if it's equally important when in fact it is not. Mercury does very well in the sign of Aquarius, by the way. So a Mercury trine Uranus has an affinity to Mercury in Aquarius, or Gemini, Uranus in Gemini, which is the current transit that I am recording during. And so it has Mercury's very busy energy. It's very buzzy. It likes all the ideas. It's curious. It wants all the answers. It wants to know all the things with no real purpose about why it's learning these things. Merely the knowledge itself, the curiosity itself is all that's important. But now you have all these facts and all this knowledge that doesn't seem to relate to anything else or anything other that you know. And so now, no filter, no editing, no discernment. You got all this great insight and none of it goes anywhere and you don't do anything with it and it doesn't get integrated. Okay? So, the shadow of this is assuming that everyone thinks just like you, mistaking cleverness for depth, never developing the patience to explain oneself or to think to those who don't immediately understand. There's so no patience either. Okay, if you don't get it, then you must not be my people, and I don't have to explain anything further. So, next is water trines. And that'd be Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. So, planets and points here are going to be in water. These signs are water trines. And so, that's a psychic resonance, an emotional resonance, an emotional attunement, a psychic attunement. Yet also boundary dissolution. When you feel everything, you may never learn where you end and others begin. And a challenge here, and here's an example, Venus trine Neptune. So Venus trine Neptune is rather in energy, has an affinity with Venus in Pisces and Neptune in Aquarius, okay? And this energy is utopian in its scope, visionary, wants to create things that don't exist in this world and get their information in a non-linear, non-evidence-based way. And so Venus trine Neptune is, love is a mystical union, but it can also be a fantasy, a projection, an addiction to the feeling rather than the person. Also, the person can be a fantasy. You don't really know them because you stopped really bothering when you just felt the connection somewhere in your body. And now you don't see the real person. You're in love with the fantasy, or at least attracted to the fantasy. The thing about Neptune energy is that it can convince you that you have a connection which is tenuous at best and not really a real deep connection, And it can feel karmic, and it can feel very valid, very true, because feelings are authentic, they're true, they're raw data. We're meant to see them as information. And so when you got a Venus-Neptune trine, this is the one that chases after the guru. This is the guru with the truth. This guru saw into my soul. This guru is my guru because they speak my language. Their values are similar to my values. I am part of something bigger, which is what I always wanted. Most people, for example, who join cults, and cults have a kind of Neptune, Venus-Neptune type vibe, archetypally, do so because they want to be part of something bigger. And this guru represents that something bigger. Maybe it's hidden knowledge that no one else knows. And you're like, wow, I'm in the in-group that knows about this. Or it made you happy or at peace, whatever it is. Neptune brings the foggy, misty illusion, delusion, and glamour to it. It is not a grounded energy, particularly. And it doesn't make it any less transcendent and beautiful, because Neptune is in the world, is in the world but not of it. And when Venus and Neptune connect, fantasy, delusion, and illusion and glamour are going to have their way. And in a very, very big way, because Neptune, in this type of way, is a shaper of form. It is shaping the expression of Venus. And so the shadow here is you can lose yourself in others. You can mistake empathy for obligation, and you can also never develop a healthy, separate self, because you're twin flames, right? You're meant to be your soulmates. So whatever horrible thing may befall you, and it does, humans are complicated and very odd creatures, and you could fall in love with an illusion. You can fall in love with a cipher. You can fall in love with someone who doesn't know you and you don't know them, but both of you keep living a fantasy. Okay? So that can be a very real shadow. Now, here's an interesting thing. When good aspects go wrong, too much ease can lead to stagnation. Okay? So let's talk about that grand trine that I mentioned previously. And that is basically 3 planets or points forming an equilateral triangle with one element being dominant. It's often called a gift, yet it can function as a closed circuit, a self-reinforcing loop with no outlet, no friction, no growth, just endless stagnation, endless comfort zone, endless feeling stuck, especially if there is a fixed sign involved here, because fixed signs are meant to sustain, they're meant to maintain and sustain, they're not meant to destroy or initiate. Okay, that's what they do. And so an example of a grand trine, we're going to go with client with a grand fire trine who has brilliant ideas yet never manages to manifest any of them because they don't have enough earth to ground that vision. And so there's no challenge to force practicality, to force refinement, because taking action means you have to refine your theory, you have to change yourself, your thinking, and also movement will change how you feel. And so, a lot of fire, very little water, very little earth. You won't have much connection to your feelings if there's no water, and you will have very little connection to grounded. That I take an action, I assess action, then I take another action based on what I learnt from taking the first. You don't learn that. Everything stays in your head, everything is a dream, everything stays theoretical. Here's a trap though. When everything flows, nothing moves. So when all the doors are open, you never have to choose one. And that's a challenge that I think I experienced a lot of when I was younger, in my late teens, early 20s. Everything was up in the air. I could have anything, be anyone, and so I never actually settled down to get to the work, the hard work of creating something, of growing something, because I liked having my options open, and if they were always open, can you guess whether or not I got any of the things I dreamed about? Spoiler alert, no, I did not. Because that's not a lesson I learnt at the time. I had a lot of fire going on, and all that fire said, you can be anything you want. You can have anything you want. And it felt good to constantly just sit there. It's very Seven of Cups. The card, sideways, depicts a person staring at a bunch of cups with all these wonderful, glorious things in them. One of them is actually a snake. In some of the decks, it'll show a snake. But all these glorious, wonderful things that you could have. And the thing about that is analysis paralysis, because your feelings are telling you, I want all of it. And your mind's like, or the Saturn in your chart's like, you're going to have to pick something to start with. We can come back for the rest of this later, but we need to pick something to go with now. And doing that feels like you're abandoning yourself or betraying yourself. So you're like, no, I won't choose. I want all of it. And so you end up choosing nothing and doing nothing. And then time passes and you realize you've gone nowhere, done nothing, and you wonder what happened. So that is the trap. Now, here's my first chart example. And by that, I'm giving an example. And so example one is the over-reliance on natural talent. So imagine a musician with Venus trine Neptune who never learnt technique because the beauty came naturally. They could just sit down at their instrument, they could play by ear, they didn't have to work too hard, it was fun. Sitting down at the piano to tinkle the ivories or a drum kit or picking up their guitar, whatever. It came naturally, it flowed. No problem. Until it was a problem. Until it stopped flowing, and they had no foundation to fall back on. Because when you're learning, when you're living, you're going to reach a point where you reach the absolute edge of your comfort zone, and if you don't stretch your comfort zone, you will be stifled right there where you stand. And if you've ever had plants, for you plant parents out there, you need to when the plant gets larger, when the roots get stronger and more, the root system grows more circuitous and more tortuous, you have to repot the plant so it has a better chance of growing and becoming a much stronger, healthier plant. People are not unlike this. So an over-reliance on talent by a trine, Venus-Neptune trine, and now you have grown as far as your natural ability will take you. And now you have to ask, what do I do next? The next one is, for trines, an entitlement trap. So we're talking about different shadows that could happen with trines. And so the next one, example 2, is the entitlement trap. So imagine a client with Jupiter trine Sun, and the Sun, Jupiter trine Sun, who expects opportunities to appear without effort because they did once, and now they're angry and bitter when they don't, and so grit never gets developed. Because with Jupiter trine the Sun, they didn't have to expand their consciousness, they didn't have to work hard, they didn't have to do anything to grow themselves. Opportunities just turned up naturally, magically, without effort, and so they got used to the pattern of them turning up and things going right. So when things stop following that pattern, because Jupiter is going to change via transit or via progression, secondary progression, now things are different. Or maybe Saturn starts acting up some other part of the chart that mitigates this. Now what do? You start to get annoyed, you start to get bitter, you start to get angry. I'm reminded of a story I heard a coach share once, a life coach share once. And the story is of a woman who was pretty, grew up with a wealthy family, had the nannies, had an idyllic childhood, grew up into a beautiful teenager, had a coming out party. This is back when that sort of thing happened quite frequently. Had a coming out party, was a star in the social circles, is just adoring nannies, wonderful parents, the whole lot. And when this woman, when she aged, she became a more bitter person. Why? Because her childhood, her adolescence, and her young adult years had set her up to believe that she could continue to expect that level of ease all through the rest of her life. And so when life dealt her some serious blows, she was unprepared and didn't know how to handle it. So at the end of the day, at the end of her life, she was an angry, bitter person because she's like, I could have been something, I could have had something, I could have created something, I coulda, was the refrain as she was getting ready to walk with death. Okay? And so, as you can see, there is that entitlement trap. And all of us can be ensnared. It's very easy. Human beings don't like to be deceived by others, but we have no problem deceiving ourselves. Okay? And so, number 3 here is the blind spot. That's another thing about trines. They can also be a blind spot. And imagine we've got ourselves a fabulous therapist, and they have a moon trine Pluto. And they intuitively understand shadow work, but have never ever felt the need to do their own. And so the trine lets them access others' depths without confronting their own. Now you can imagine this is going to be a problem because, they can see other people's shadows, but they can't see their own. So what do you think could happen when the moon is involved? We get issues of power, control. But here's another thing. This person hasn't done their own shadow work, and so the shadows they see in others might not actually be shadows belonging to those people. Those might be shadows that belong to them, and yet they are not paying attention, they are not doing their own shadow work, so they do not have the awareness and therefore cannot recognize when the shadow that they're noticing in others is actually their own. And a therapist who cannot recognize their own shadow and projects it onto others, because the moon is involved, and the moon is also a mirror, but it's also a projector, in that moon aspects tend to be also about projection depending on the planet there. And so now at some point they're going to reach the absolute edge of their comfort zone, the absolute edge of their ability to shadow work, because it's not possible to be 100% accurate about your assessments of other people and their shadows when you don't even know what's in yours. And so the lesson here is, just because you can see something clearly doesn't mean you've integrated it. See, that is a challenge that I myself have, and through my experiences with shadow work, with practitioners, the trained practitioners present or not, but I learned that too. Yes, you can know the right way and not do it. You can see the correct answer and not choose it. Because just because you know it, don't mean you're going to do it. Don't mean you're going to integrate it, because integration is an uncomfortable experience. It can be disorienting. It can be threatening to your nervous system. And just because you're perceptive doesn't mean every perception that you have is accurate. So let's move on to our own trine maps. So here's what I like to suggest. Using your trines to find fluency in your own chart. So here's the first thing to do. Locate your natal chart, your natal trine. So you pull up your chart and you look for planets approximately 120 degrees apart. Note the element. fire, earth, air, water, and the specific planets or points involved. So, for example, Venus trine Neptune, for example, and it's in water. So, Venus is in Pisces and Neptune is in also Pisces. No, it's not. That doesn't make any sense. I just said trine and I just gave you a conjunction. Okay, so you see where I'm at today. So Venus in Pisces and Neptune in Cancer. That is a trine. So look for your natal trines first of all. Second, ask the uncomfortable questions. Where do you coast? Where have you never had to struggle or to try? Where do you assume you're correct even because it feels natural? Where has ease become entitlement? Where has fluency become complacency? Where has talent become a substitute for discipline? What would happen if this trine disappeared tomorrow? Have you built anything real or just enjoyed the feeling? Because trines, they do feel good. They feel supportive. They feel like the universe, the cosmos is on your side, and who doesn't want to lean into that, right? Option three, activate your trines consciously. So choose one natal trine and commit to using it with intention this week. Don't let it run on autopilot. So if you have Mercury trine Jupiter, don't just talk, teach, share your understanding in a way that requires effort, structure, discipline, accountability. And if you have Venus trine Saturn, don't just appreciate beauty, create something that lasts. Commit to a creative practice that demands discipline, focus, and attention. And next, reframe this question. So, let's not ask what gifts do my trines give me? Instead ask, what languages do my trines allow me to speak? And am I using them to communicate anything true, real, authentic? Okay, so here is our key takeaway. Trines are not cosmic rewards. They are not evidence particularly of merit. They are pieces, they are places of relational fluency where planets speak the same elemental language. This fluency is beautiful, it's useful, it's even necessary. Yet it is not inherently virtuous, good, or always useful. And it can become a prison of ease, of comfort, of complacency, if it's left unchecked, unexamined, and on autopilot. So, here are some journal prompts. Where in your life do you mistake ease for righteousness or even rightness? Is there somewhere you've stopped questioning because it feels natural? What have you never had to fight for? And has that absence of struggle cost you depth, resilience, or even self-knowledge and self-intimacy? If you had to explain your natural talents to someone who doesn't share them, could you? Or have you never had to articulate what comes so easily? So, here's a practical exercise. Track one trine via transit this week. So, mentioned trying it with your natal chart. Also try it with a transit this week. So note when the sun, the moon, or a personal planet forms a trine to a natal planet, for example. Notice how it feels, what flows, but what also you take for granted or overlook because it's natural and easy. Alright, so the next episode is episode 163, sextiles as invitations, not guarantees, and how the 60-degree aspect asks for your participation, your choice, your conscious engagement, and why that makes it more reliable than a trine. Okay? So, May your ease become conscious, your fluency become generous, and your gifts become offerings rather than entitlements. And until next time, stay intellectually rebellious and mystically honest. Peace, Star People.